Hello, so this is the Week 11 recap. I hope you guys are all doing well, and the discussion board posts were pretty full this week, so that was really good to see. A tougher topic this week, at least in terms of the Susan Wolf article. A little bit longer, a little bit more complex, but I hope you enjoyed it. Also, hope you enjoyed watching the movie Gran Torino, which you guys voted on, and it's certainly an excellent one. So just a few kind of comments to recap some of the essential points that you made in your post from this week. Number one, the question is whether Walt is a good man. I think one of the primary issues here is whether you believe that he is fundamentally a good man or whether he became a good man. Clearly at the end of the movie, it is very easy to make an argument that he was a good man. He sacrificed himself, literally laid down his life in order to try to bring peace to the neighborhood and to bring peace and a future to both Tao and Sue. And that is, even though he had lung cancer and he was dying, certainly generous and brave to be able to do that for someone. And many of you thought, look, he wasn't a good man in the beginning of the movie, but he became one as the movie progressed. And for those that took this line of argument, many of you argued that essentially he moved from an egotist to an altruist. That at the beginning of the movie, the only thing that mattered was him, his desires, his concerns, his way of looking at the world, that he was ready to blow off anyone and everyone, including his own family, if they annoyed him. So in the beginning of the movie, many of you thought of him as, look, a very self-absorbed individual. He only cared about himself and screw everybody else. And that could certainly be connected with his racism. That literally anybody who's not like him doesn't matter, doesn't count. That they're idiots, they're whatever racial slur that he used for them. But as the movie progressed, many of you saw him becoming a good man because he came to care more and more about others. He became more of an altruist. An interesting question related to this is, certainly he cared about the Tao family, the Hmong family. But if he was becoming more of an altruist, why was he not able to care for his own family? It's just something to ponder. Another way, though, if you want to say, look, the argument against him just becoming a good man, some might argue that he was always a good man. And if you go this route, you might focus on the regrets that he had throughout his life. In the confession scene towards the end of the movie, he confessed that his biggest regrets were that he didn't pay taxes on a boat, he kissed a girl at a Christmas party, and he was never able to develop relationships with his sons. So you could say, look, because he harbored those regrets, he was the kind of person that always devoted himself to something more. In a certain sense, you might say, look, he was a moral saint in that regard, that he was very much duty-bound. And the other big regret that we find when he locks Tao in the basement was that essentially he's saying, look, I killed an innocent Korean kid, and that haunts me. I think about that every single day of my life, and I don't want you to have that on your soul. So if indeed those things were haunting him, one might argue that the very presence of that regret indicates that he did deep down care about others. Maybe his racism, maybe his coldness was just simply his way of coping with the guilt that had burdened him. Certainly possible. Another thing, racial language. The idea that he was a racist. Certainly he uses racial language, and at times it really does appear to demean and put down other people. But other times it seems like it's a mark of camaraderie, a mark of friendship. Maybe an acknowledgement that, look, you're tough enough to kind of hang with me. When I look at the Moral Saints article in Susan Wolf, and this is, key for you guys to understand, is that she is arguing against the common sense assumption that moral sainthood is good. And our intuitive reaction is that if someone devotes themselves to morality, devotes themselves to others, they must be good. In fact, they must be better than most of us who are not able to do that. And the common sense assumption is that what holds most of us back are traits that, ultimately be better if we did not have. If we weren't quite so selfish, or if we weren't quite so cruel, or if we weren't quite so sarcastic, or if we weren't quite so mean, or if we didn't like to gossip, or things like that. But Susan Wolf is arguing, look, no, The issue isn't simply that we shouldn't have certain traits. The issue is that we shouldn't strive to become a moral saint. And when she talks about moral saints, she breaks it down into two categories. A rational saint who does his or her duty simply because it's the right thing to do. And they often don't feel like doing it. They're like most of us who don't always feel like being moral, but nevertheless they overcome their desires and they do it because it's right. And that's different than the loving saint who essentially likes, enjoys, takes pleasure in doing what is moral and devoting themselves to others. But in either case, the commonality is in both. There is this devotion to others. One because they like it, the other because it's their duty. We talk about why this is a problem. Really, Susan Wolf gives two basic arguments. She says the life of a moral saint, number one, is a life where you cannot truly love another person. And you cannot truly be a good friend or a good family member because your duty is what is always most important. So you have to miss an anniversary, if you have to miss a kid's birthday party because there's a morally greater demand, you do so. And for Wolf, that's inconsistent with what it means to love and what it means to be in a personal relationship. That sometimes, although not always, if you're always doing things for those that you love and forgetting the common good, then in a certain sense you're too restricted, you're too narrow in your worldview. You're too just focused on your kind of little circle. But if you're always ready to give up those personal commitments, and if you're always ready to do something that is morally more worthy and leave those you love behind, well, then you can't really be said to love them. In the same way, she's saying, look, if you're a moral saint, you can't ever be devoted to non-moral goods. You can't ever become a great cook, or maybe a great athlete. You can't love going out to fancy restaurants or going to the beach or traveling or something like that because that time and resources you spend on those things, those activities, could be used for something better. But she's going to argue, look, it's not simply that a selfish desire to do these things that make me not be a moral saint. It's that these are part of living a full and complete and worthwhile human existence, and because moral sainthood doesn't allow that, there's something wrong with it. And when we talk about Walt, and when you talked about him in your discussion boards as being a moral saint, there's a couple interesting kind of posts I wanted to bring up. Somebody argued that, look, he's detached from the world and others. And certainly this is a hallmark, as I just mentioned, for Susan Wolf and moral saints. They're detached. They're not fully connected. They're not fully immersed. They're not fully engaged with other individuals. They're just completely devoted to this moral duty and being completely impartial about it. And it's interesting, okay, so if he is detached, why is that the case? Is it because he was so devoted to moral duty? Or was it perhaps because of the remorse I mentioned earlier? Was it that he feared building relationships with others because of the guilt he harbored, or because he felt somehow inadequate to it? It's also true that some of the posts mentioned that he was able to put his feelings aside. And it's really important to notice that this is the hallmark of a rational saint for Susan Wolf. Not necessarily a moral, loving saint, but a rational saint. And then again, the question becomes, why was Waltz ready to put aside his feelings? Was it because of this devotion to moral duty that he overcame his feelings and said they didn't matter? Or was it because simply that in some way he was incapable of feeling, that he'd given up normal human emotions? And I think the idea here, again with moral sainthood, in both loving and rational, is that you're truly and ultimately devoted to others. And I think it's fair to ask whether Walt was fully devoted to others. Clearly in the end he was, but one might argue that he was never fully committed to others. He was more fully committed to himself and his goals and his duties. Sorry for the coughing. Okay, and I want to get to the living ethics. Some really interesting posts here, and I'll just mention some people by name. Paige, your mom was flattered by the comparisons. So these first comparisons are all about the tree. But she reconsidered her approach when you mentioned how your younger brother was using her. So again, at first glance, it probably seems like the tree is wonderful, is good, is the ideal. But one can ask whether in being completely generous, at all moments, at all times, with all people, whether that's right. What's really interesting about the Giving Tree story is that we can question whether generosity is always good. Kelsey, your mom, you mentioned that she's the Giving Tree, and she loved it. She enjoyed it. It's something that fulfills her. So we might compare her to the loving saints in Susan Wolf's article, Moral Saints. Samantha, you said your dad totally gives of himself, and you argued that he was similar to the tree, and not only that he gives all the time, but it takes a toll on his body. And it's interesting that he said, look, I realize this, but I don't care. It's for my kids, and I'm willing to literally sacrifice myself for my children. Much like the tree sacrificed herself for the boy. And it's interesting when you talk about the tree, you can ask yourself, did the tree sacrifice herself for someone who is worthwhile, for someone who deserved it? And Samantha, you might also ask yourself whether your dad is sacrificing himself for kids that deserve it. Have you truly lived up to the sacrifice? Have you been the best kids and children that you can be? Jacqueline, it's interesting. You talked about your mom being taken advantage of. She actually got defensive, tried to protect herself, tried to defend herself when you argued that she was being taken advantage of. And Amanda, you raised an interesting point. You said your mom actually questioned whether she was being used by her kids, but that ultimately this brought you closer together. So it's interesting that this story awakens in your mom the possibility that maybe she is being used. Victoria, you talked about how your sister was really touched by being associated with a tree, and how you questioned whether you were the boy, or a little bit too much like the boy. Interesting, Anthony, you saw your brother as the tree, and you compared him to the tree, and he was put off by that. He thought the tree was weak. He thought the tree was too indulgent. He thought the tree wasn't really doing what it should have been doing for the boy. And this is an important point, because one can argue that, look, did the tree really love the boy, or did it just do what made him feel good? Did it really help the boy become better, or did it leave him in a worse state? And this relates to Aubrey's post, who argues that her boyfriend is like the tree, but that's not actually good, necessarily, because she considered herself more like the boy. And she thought, look, by her boyfriend always giving to her, always doing things for her, perhaps she is not becoming a better person. And ultimately, if you love someone, most people would think you're going to try to make that person better, help that person develop. And if the tree did not help the boy develop, you can ask whether the tree really ultimately loved the boy. Maybe she was just so lonely that she wanted company and she needed help. Okay, now a number of you compared the people you spoke with to the boy. Shirley, you said your sister was the boy. She's only been concerned with taking from others. She's always wanting more stuff. But it'd be interesting to notice, you didn't mention this in your post, how your sister reacted to being called the boy. Sarah, you said there's something very similar with your cousin. And it's interesting that your cousin, one, first tried to disagree that she was like the boy, and then tried to defend the boy himself. So instead of kind of recognizing her fault, recognizing what was wrong, she instead tried to make herself feel better. And maybe like the boy, there's a certain self-absorption in that response. Mary, you talked about your brother as the boy, and you actually got him to consider, maybe whether he was being too selfish and self-absorbed. So that's great to hear that he was thinking about that. And finally, Daisy, you compared your brother, like Mary, to the boy, and what you mentioned was interesting, where you said, look, maybe he didn't even realize that he was being like the boy. Maybe there's certain ignorance. Maybe you're so self-absorbed you don't realize who you're hurting. And so the living ethics were interesting and worthwhile, and they helped just in terms of further understanding the Giving Tree and wrapping up some of those loose ends. So that's the recap of Week 11, and look forward to Week 12.